Hello there, and thank you so much for choosing to come and listen to this presentation. I'm going to talk for the next 20-25 minutes about mental well-being in the tech industry. And firstly, just to give you a little snapshot about who I am. I'm Nikki Graham. I'm a 42-year-old mum of two. I'm a wife. I'm operations manager at GCD Technologies. Started out after school by doing a degree in sports studies, and then I did a master's in management, and I've always had an interest in these two areas, and in particular combining the two of them through workplace wellbeing. Still enjoy my sport. I run 5 times a week. Last year did 2 marathons, and I also play hockey. Started out after university as a statistician for the government, and then I moved to become an investigating officer for the Northern Ireland Ombudsman's Office. And I loved this job. I really enjoyed it, but I found that a combination of the daily commute, the constant competitive ambitions of my staff, and the expectation that people would be doing overtime most weekends, it just got to me. And in 2017 I had what I like to call my midlife crisis. I was burnt out. I was diagnosed with depression, and after about 9 months of sick leave I decided that I was going to abandon my public sector career and reevaluate life. One thing led to another, and in 2018 I joined GCD Technologies. Now, I still take medication every day, and I still have my bad days and my bad spells, but all in all I have no regrets whatsoever about this change that I made. My work-life balance now is great. I have a great workplace. I have fantastic colleagues. It's less than 10 minutes away from my home, and it offers me the flexibility to be all of these things that I would like to be. So I guess that's why I'm doing this presentation today. I want to highlight this issue, campaign for more awareness of how it can be addressed by each and every one of us. So we all have physical health, but we also all have mental health. And according to the World Health Organization, mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realises his or her own abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And well-being is a balance point between an individual's resource pool and the challenges that they face. And that's relevant whether it's physical well-being or mental well-being. Poor mental health, simply put, is when our mental health is not what we would want it to be, and we don't have that balance quite right. Poor mental health is when we find it difficult to manage how we think, feel, act with respect to daily stresses, and maybe you have difficulty getting to sleep, you have trouble concentrating, you don't want to get up in the morning, or you don't feel like having a bit of chit chat at tea break time and work. It's important to remember that everybody goes through this. These feelings are widespread, and poor mental health is common, but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is mentally ill. Having continuous episodes of poor mental health could indicate a problem, and a mental illness is a diagnosable and treatable health condition which can be severe enough to disrupt everyday life. But it's not black and white, it's a spectrum, and we need to remember that we all have chinks in our armour. You don't have to have a diagnosis of a mental illness to have poor mental health. So I think we need to remove the stigma of craziness, of insanity being mental, and let's all accept that this topic is relevant to everyone. What I want to do from now on is to refer to this bug as mental well-being. Let's not box it up as poor mental health and present it as a negative phenomenon that only affects a few people. Let's go with a concept that's relevant to all of us and is equally as important as physical well-being. The National Institute for Health and Care Excellence states that common mental health disorders affect an estimated 1 in 6 adults at any one time. Zoning in on the workplace, the average UK worker takes 4.4 sick days per year, and of those 12.4% are due to mental health conditions, and that's 17.5 million working days every year. And yet poor mental well-being is probably underreported. It's stigmatised, and the true impact of it is unknown. And there's also the concept of presenteeism in the workplace, and that's when staff report to work when really they aren't feeling well and they're probably not fit for work, but they don't want to say so. And zoning in on the tech industry, alarmingly, evidence suggests that the tech industry has a much higher prevalence of poor mental well-being, up to 5 times as much amongst staff than the UK average. And there are many factors that can influence our mental well-being. Psychological factors, past events such as trauma, abuse, loss, bullying, loneliness and neglect. Biological factors such as genetics, physical health, drug and alcohol misuse, and brain chemistry. And environmental factors, the weather, air pollution, and our working and living conditions. And the next slide is an animation from the mental health charity Mind, and I think it just really nicely summarises what I've talked about up until now.
We're Mind, the mental health charity. We're here to make sure everybody with a mental health problem has somewhere to turn for advice and support. In the past, people thought if you had a mental health problem, you would never feel better. You might meet people who still feel this. Maybe you feel this way about yourself. Mental health is just like physical health. Everybody has it and needs to look after it. You have good mental health if you're able to think, feel, and react in the ways that you need and want. You might need support with your mental health if you are finding the way you're thinking, feeling, or reacting is more difficult or even impossible to cope with. This might be because of things that are happening in your life right now. A traumatic event may affect your mental health in a big way too, even years later. We are all different. Everybody experiences a huge variety of feelings, thoughts and emotions as part of their normal life. But how and when we have them can be really different depending on who we are. Some of us can find these harder to cope with. This can be because of our upbringing and childhood, past experiences, or the things happening in our lives right now. That's why it's important that only you, someone who knows you really well, or someone who is qualified, gets to say when you need help. If your feelings, thoughts and reactions are getting in the way of how you want to live, if you feel things aren't right, if you feel like you need help, you can ask for it. We're not going to pretend it's easy. Mental health problems can change your life, and for some they can be overwhelming. But that's why Mind is here. We're going to face it with you. We'll listen, give support and fight your corner. To find out more, visit mind.org.uk.
So we've looked at the bug, we've looked at the prevalence of it and the factors that can influence it, and now I want to look at how this bug can make, firstly, how it can impact the individual. What I've listed here, and I'm not going to read them out, and it's not exhaustive, but it's a list of some of the most frequent symptoms of the most common mental health conditions. And this is a snippet of a really personal letter that I shared with all of my colleagues at the start of lockdown. I realised that a lot of other people were struggling, and I thought that if I let them know how I felt, then they would know that they weren't alone. And I talk here about my disturbed sleep, racing thoughts, physical pain, and just how I wanted to withdraw socially. So how does this translate to the workplace? Well, firstly through absenteeism. The increase in sickness absence will have an obvious impact on the quantity and quality of work done, and therefore the bottom line, essentially the profitability of the business, particularly when there are frequent short periods of absence. And sufferers of poor mental well-being also experience physical symptoms, and this may compound the outcome. It can also affect work performance, and whether that's as a result of absenteeism or by byproduct of presenteeism. There could also be a reduction in productivity and output, an increase in error rates or accidents. It could be poor decision making, a deterioration in planning and control of work, and this could be compounded by a loss of motivation and commitment, burnout, poor timekeeping and staff turnover. And finally, it can affect relationships at work. A prevalence of poor mental well-being in the workplace may lead to tension and conflicts between colleagues, poor relationships with clients, and an increase in disciplinary problems. So why does the tech industry have a higher prevalence? than the rest of the population. And while some factors can't be accounted for in the workplace, such as the psychological and biological factors, there are a number of relevant factors, and I'm going to look at 3 of them. Firstly, the nature of the job. It's a well-proven fact that physical and mental well-being can impact each other, and that taking measures to improve our physical well-being can also improve our mental well-being. The UK Chief Medical Officer, when he's not dealing with a pandemic, advises that for good physical and mental well-being, adults should aim to be physically active every day. They should aim to minimise the amount of time spent being sedentary, and when physically possible, they should break up long periods of inactivity with at least light physical activity. And here lies the problem, because the tech industry by its very nature is a sedentary industry. Generally speaking, the job involves long periods of sitting indoors, quite often under artificial lights with poor ventilation, and people are staring at screens, multiple screens. Lighting and air quality and temperature of an office can also impact well-being. Sick building syndrome is a phenomenon that became popular in the 90s, and it relates to well-being being affected for no apparent reason other than a particular building. For example, serotonin, which is known as the happy hormone, increases with sunlight, and that's why psychiatrists recommend depressed patients go out into the sun for 30 minutes every day. And numerous studies have also shown that poor air quality reduces worker productivity. So it's crucial that today's businesses focus on creating healthy buildings. More often than not, work in the tech industry is also done in isolation, and research has found that 64% of lone workers face psychological distress, which is significantly higher than employees who work alongside colleagues. And this is especially relevant during the current pandemic. Who has missed the laughter, the camaraderie, the banter, the support that you have in the office? And how can employers make sure that healthy buildings are maintained when staff are working remotely? There's the nature of the workforce. The demographics of the tech industry is skewed towards younger male workers. Millennials, who are usually thought of those born after 1980 or 84, make up a large proportion of the tech industry, and much has been written about them. Simon Sinek, who's an author and a TED speaker, did a really interesting talk about millennials. He stressed that through no fault of their own, millennials have the trait that if something isn't great, they move on rather than address the unhappiness. He talked about how millennials are accustomed to instant gratification. So, for example, box sets, next day delivery, on-demand services, swiping right to show your interest in someone. Millennials are also known for having been exposed to increased parental protection during their education years and for a focus on participation rather than winning. For example, even the losers getting medals on sports day. And frankly, this isn't a reality in the workplace. Sinek has said that this entire generation is more likely to have low self-esteem through no fault of their own. In addition to this, people who spend more time on social media, which is more likely to be the younger generations, have higher rates of depression than those who spend lower amounts of time. They quite often get a hit from how many likes or shares or retweets they've generated with a social media post, rather than through the satisfaction of working at something over a period of time and being able to look back at the progress made. This instant hit releases dopamine, which is known as the feel-good neurotransmitter, and it's rather like the same hit that you get from alcohol and drugs. And like these substances, they can be okay in measured amounts, but excessive amounts can be really dangerous. There's also gender imbalance in the tech industry. Approximately 84% of the tech workforce is male, and while mental well-being difficulties can affect anyone, regardless of demographics, studies have shown that certain mental illnesses affect men and women differently. Perhaps the most interesting and worrying finding is that while on average more women are diagnosed with common mental health illnesses than men, the rate of suicide is significantly higher amongst them. This suggests that men are suffering with mental distress, but may not be receiving or indeed asking for the help that they need. And this was highlighted recently in a BBC documentary by Freddie Flintoff, where he talks about eating disorders. And the nature of the industry, well, you've probably heard about the tech revolution, the digital revolution. The UK tech industry is a high growth, fast paced industry which grew 6 times faster than any other industry in the UK economy in 2018, and it's been described as being right in the driving seat for the future. The industry has a reputation of being always on. Bugs, crashes, hacks, they can happen at any time of day or night. And work is quite often managed in sprints, and businesses that build by time want to squeeze, understandably, as much out of their staff as possible. Our work emails and documents are available on our own personal phones, and all of this means it's harder to separate our work and private lives. So how do we fix this? Well, a recent study reported that 3/4 of employees don't think that their workplace offers enough mental wellbeing support, and this needs to change. Addressing mental well-being is a crucial issue as it affects individuals in their personal lives as well as at work, and that's why the World Health Organization has dedicated a day as World Mental Health Day, and that's actually the 10th of October, so it's great timing. Employers have a duty to care for all staff, and you'll see the signs for fire exits for who the first aider is, where you'll find a bandage or a plaster, and this is all in the event of these provisions being needed. But what provisions are made for mental well-being? We need to be proactive about this. Organisations also need to understand that mental wellness is multifaceted. There's no hot fix. You won't roll out a programme and see the benefits of it in 30 days, so it's a really hard sell. But failure to see mental well-being as a priority is risky. But what organisations have it listed on their risk register? They might have accounted for the building burning to the ground or a major power outage, but the more likely scenario is that their staff could be absent or under par due to poor mental well-being, and this has been brushed under the carpet. Furthermore, if a member staff has a physical disability or injury, reasonable adjustments are immediately made. Can this be said of those who are experiencing poor mental well-being? So whose job is it to fix this bug? Well, I reckon it's a top-down, bottom-up approach that should be tackled from the outside in and the inside out, so essentially everybody. Starting at the top, mental well-being needs to be brought out of the shadows and into the spotlight of the boardroom, so that executives can ensure their employees have access to the resources that they need to be able to make the balance that we have talked about. Companies need to put in place their own policies and training to support employees, as well as raise awareness of mental well-being. Simon Sinek, in a separate talk about empathy, stated that the real job of a leader is not to be in charge, but to take care of those in our charge. Generally, organisations don't have a director of wellness, so we need to make sure that we have stakeholders, internal champions, subject matter experts. However, ultimately, we shouldn't leave well-being up to other people. Personal maintenance is also vital, especially given that mental well-being is subjective and a myriad of factors can influence it. So in essence, we're all in this together, each and every one of us. The NHS suggests that there are 5 steps to mental well-being, so I want to look at this and see how we can use these 5 steps to write good code for looking after mental well-being in our workplaces. There's no out-of-the-box solution, but these are some wireframes to get things started, really show us how we can grow our resource pools, and these are my 6 suggestions. Firstly, we need to be aware. We must educate ourselves, educate our staff, educate our management, and educate each other. We need to share our stories, bring in the experts, do our research and have discussions, because in this case, ignorance is definitely not bliss. Everyone needs empathy and perspective, and the only way that we can gain perspective is to be aware. I read an article recently on Belfast Live website about a mum and daughter in Bangor who have created a gymwear brand to raise money for mental health charities, and I was really struck by a quote in it where they said, check on your friends and family and just have open conversations about how everyone is doing mentally. Sometimes the biggest of smiles can hide the most pain. So we need to have empathy and we need to be open. It's imperative that we talk to each other, but also that we listen. We need to know the verbal and non-verbal cues that people give when they're not tip-top. And we must break down any barriers or stigmas to this. So let's talk, for example, about my broken toe. At the start of lockdown, I fell out of a bin and broke my toe. And I was really proud. On a daily basis, I was showing everybody the pictures to show the change in the colour and the size and the shape of my toe. But when it came to my own mental well-being, it took me 17 months to open up to my colleagues and let them know that I had depression. We need an equal playing field between physical and mental well-being, so we need to be brave and talk about it. A friend of mine recently lost a family member to suicide. That was the radio presenter Stephen Clements. And her and Stephen's family have been campaigning ever since. And she recently posted on social media that people know it's okay to not be okay, but do they know that it's actually okay to talk? Thirdly, we need to be active. I've already mentioned that physical activity can help support mental well-being, so let's encourage each other in the workplace to do this. Let's have lunchtime walks, daily step competitions, after work yoga, 5-a-side, or maybe just a daily stretching ritual. It doesn't have to be rigorous or onerous, but we need to keep moving to keep well. And quite often people feel safety in numbers when exercising, and it's also easier once a habit's formed or when everyone else is doing it. We need to be nourished. Firstly, we must nourish our body. It's easy in the workplace to snack on unhealthy products, skip meals, overdo the caffeinated drinks. But if workplaces have tasty, healthy alternatives available, then perhaps we can change our habits, and perhaps we can also encourage each other with this. We also need to nourish our brains, keeping our minds active and learning new skills, and these steps all add to an overall sense of well-being. And finally, make sure you get enough kit, because sleep really makes a world of difference. My fifth suggestion is to be flexible. We need to listen to the individual needs and understand their backstories. A one-size approach to promote wellness will not fit all, and a rigid policy will not address the needs of everyone, or indeed anyone. We also need to be flexible in our approach to ourselves and others. We must do what we can to understand and ensure that everyone has a good work-life balance. It's so important to come to work feeling well, but also that we go home feeling well. And finally, we need to be kind. We should be kind to each other inside and outside of the organisation. Social connectedness is known to improve mental well-being for all involved. Let's understand ourselves and understand each other. Forget the "how was your weekend" chit-chat and dig a bit deeper. After all, there are few people in the world who you spend as much time with. The average person spends a quarter of their adult life at work, and that's about 3,500 days. And let's also stretch that kindness beyond the office walls. Why don't we give, help, volunteer, support? Let's make sure that everybody has the opportunity to do these things. For example, the Stephen Clements Foundation is promoting a random act of kindness week in December. Why don't we give this a go? But overall, let's embed all of these actions and make them part of the culture and back end of our business. We need to ensure that our corporate environments provide everyone with the tools that they need to strike the right balance for mental well-being. It shouldn't be something that we need to plan and timetable. It should be part of who we are and what we do. We need to move to society where all of us become aware of our own mental well-being, of other people's mental well-being, and how to cope with our own and other people's mental well-being when it fluctuates. It's all of our responsibilities to make this change, and this is our call to action. For anyone who wants any further information or help, I've listed a few suggestions here. The NHS website is always a really reliable go-to for any health and wellbeing related information. I've also listed a number of awareness and support organisations, some local, some are national, and might be useful for you, colleague, a friend, a family member, or your organisation. And there's also a link there to the Belfast Live article that I mentioned. And these are a few resources that I particularly find helpful. Kelly Holmes, her podcast series, She interviews a number of celebrities who suffer from poor mental well-being, and I found that a number of them really eloquently described their conditions and how they cope with them. I also bought myself a couple of good old-fashioned books. Firstly, Mental Health and Wellbeing in the Workplace. This is a really useful section. It has a brief description about some of the more common mental health conditions for those of us who are not familiar with some of them, what signs to look out for, and how you should behave when you encounter them. And there's also a full chapter on supporting staff experiencing mental health problems. And then Jog On by Bella Mackey. This is another honest and actually quite funny read where she describes how she unwittingly used running to manage her crippling anxiety and depression. And finally, just want to thank you so much for your interest in this subject matter. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much for listening, and please take care.